No nukes for AI. France for the French. Absolute power, courtesy of SCOTUS, and more. The Monica Perez Show starts now. We are going to have some fun today. I haven't spoken to you since we've had the presidential debate. It was very amusing. And I've got some funny comments on that and some takes that I'm sure you have not heard. So it's going to be worth sticking around till the end of the show today. Also, but on a very unfun and super sad note, 4 days ago, Congressman Thomas Massey's wife died unexpectedly at their home. No cause of death has been given still. She was 51. Her obituary says Rhonda never had a bad day. She was always positive, never spoke ill of others, and remained humble. Her passing was a shock to everyone, but she had fought through years of health struggles so well and without complaint that most wouldn't have known she had any. So that's kind of oblique. It also gives you something to hang on to if you want to think that it was natural. And I think it's in poor taste to dig into like the conspiracies of these things and their possibilities, but I don't take much comfort in that little line in the obituary, because if something untoward did happen to her, I wouldn't expect her family to out that. I remember Chris Kyle. I remember Vince Foster. I mean, the spouses are like, oh, yeah, there is absolutely nothing fishy here. But I saw this. I didn't see the whole thing. I was fascinated by it. I would love to watch the whole thing. Very long, like I think it was a couple of hours, possibly, of Thomas Massey, the Kentucky congressman, one of them, on Tucker Carlson, and he was saying some stuff that normally I would think just like plays into like the common themes. Like one of the things he was saying was every congressman has an IPAC handler except for him. And I mean, either that's something that they want out there because it just plays along with all these themes, or it's something you're really not supposed to say. So I don't know. And I know when, like, the thing I think is to be feared if you're an outspoken person is either if you're super charismatic leader or if you have firsthand knowledge that people don't have. And so I just feel like, who knows? But I will keep my eyes open to see whether, or let's just say I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Congressman Massey is not as outspoken as he used to be. And, who knows? Who knows? But it's very super, super sad. But in the actual, news today that we can try to, see the hidden meaning behind, I think it's actually pretty straightforward. There's a few Supreme Court decisions out that one of them, I'm actually going to speak to the Travis Mateer, our man from Missoula, who you've heard before. He wants to come on the show to talk about the Grants Pass ruling, Supreme Court ruling in Grants Pass. That's on Friday. I'm going to be talking to him at 9 a.m. Pacific. That's going to be live, 12 noon Eastern. I'm trying to get Eric Buchanan on to talk about the Chevron decision. Chevron was overturned, basically, and I would love to talk to him about that. He's talked to us about it when it was still good law, and now it isn't. So the case I want to talk about now is this case about the Supreme Court and presidential immunity. So the headline is: the Supreme Court protects the presidency in Trump versus U.S. A 6-3 majority rules that presidents have presumptive immunity from criminal prosecution for their official acts. So this was a highly anticipated decision. This was about, let's see, I have an actual quote. I don't like to get it wrong. So Trump versus U.S. was about the The indictment alleged that former President Trump sought to use the Justice Department to convince certain states to swap out their legitimate electors for fraudulent electors that would cast their votes for Trump. That's the allegation. The government alleges Trump met with the Justice Department and White House officials to discuss an investigation of claimed election fraud and the sending of a letter from the Justice Department to states claiming that purported fraud had taken place. When the acting attorney general rebuffed Trump's requests to carry out the scheme, Trump threatened to fire him multiple times. That's what the indictment alleges. Now, I personally think that that's crap. There was tons of fraud. And honestly, I think that's one of the hot things you're not allowed to say on YouTube. So, observe the banner that this show might come down after 5 minutes if you're not watching live, and then you can just find it in other places. I can take that banner down now. So I think this is complete crap. So there was fraud. So I think that what he was doing was legit. They're saying what he was doing was not legit. But by saying it's not legit, you're really talking about his motive and all that. The bigger question is this subject, whether he was right or wrong, whether the facts support their indictment or not, whether a jury or a judge would find him guilty of the motives they're imputing to him, is this action that he's taken, is the subject matter either core duties, like are they his core duties constitutionally, or even duties kind of, it says, to the outer limits of the possible, I think there's a Nixon quote, like the outer limits of what his official acts could be. And what I'm saying is what the court is saying is, if that topic pertains to some of his legitimate functions, you cannot prosecute him on that, because whether it's right or wrong, the specter of being prosecuted will change your behavior. And that's not what they want. They want a president to feel free to act in the interests of the country without worrying about his own best interests. So the fact that, in my opinion, he was right in all of this, and that just demonstrates to me the exact point of giving the president, because I don't even like the idea of immunity for anything. I don't like immunity from liability, generally speaking, but I get it now. In this case, he was functioning correctly as president, but the other side doesn't like it. So they're prosecuting him for this. And Justice Clarence Thomas, of course, comes up with something, a little off to this, not the main subject that they're talking about. In his concurrence, he says you should actually not even have gotten to this question, because it's all about a case brought by a special prosecutor or special counsel, and there's no place in the Constitution for a special counsel. This is an illegitimate position. No law or statute is cited for how, I believe it was Biden appointed it or Merrick Garland appointed it, which is an executive thing, DOJ, that they have no right to appoint a special counsel. And I've actually thought this about the Constitution. If there's no mechanism for enforcement, then there's no law there. It's like why I don't think the FBI or the DOJ should exist. The federal government does not have enforcement power of laws that the states do not enforce. I consider it state nullification. Anyway, that's another topic, but it's a good idea. If there's no mechanism for enforcement, it's not a real law, in my opinion. Or that's not a bad rule of thumb. So I get it and I agree with it. And then, but furthermore, so this case is pretty clearly within the constitutional bounds. There's 3 tiers of potential immunity. One is core constitutional things, has core constitutional functions of the presidency, gives unfettered, absolute immunity to the president. Stuff with up to the outer limits of his possible function as president, you presume immunity unless the government can show that. Let's see. Applying a criminal prohibition on the act would not encroach on the functions of the executive branch. And that's a pretty high standard. And it says unofficial acts are not protected at all. So it suggests a balancing test. On the one side is the desire to enable the president to take the bold and unhesitating action required for the office. On the other side is the value of enforcing federal criminal law. The court determines at least a presumptive immunity from criminal prosecution for a president's acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. Without this cone of protection, according to Chief Justice Roberts, the presidency would be bound by undue caution. So the core functions with which investigating these crimes is a core function. So he's absolutely immune from that. There are some other issues talking to Vice President Pence and all that kind of stuff that could have been borderline. But they have a high standard for that. And then unofficial acts are free game. Now, the way that pertains to the hush money case, because now Trump went and said, you've got to overturn this conviction or drop this case or whatever, at the very least. So he was convicted of that, and there's sentencing coming up. And the sentencing has already been postponed. And Trump says the whole case should be dismissed or thrown out or overturned or whatever, because some of the evidence that was presented in that case pertained to acts for which Trump has absolute immunity. And part of this case that was determined was that the acts that have immunity are not. Oh, I see. My gain was the way I'm talking softly because my gain is way, way up. Hold on a second. Sorry, technical issue. Okay. So the reason I was speaking softly is because there was my mic was super, super loud in my ears, and I realized that my gain is way, way up. So I can give you more energy now. Let's see. I need some professional guidance from my producer who's watching. Anyway, you guys can tell me. Okay. So they could throw out he's saying throw out the whole case because they kind of corrupted it by having evidence of whatever. All right. So we'll see what happens with that hush money case. But it doesn't, these kind of things, people are focusing so seriously on why, on how this affects Trump. But I consider these cases are brought to the Supreme Court under certain circumstances because they want the Supreme Court to change the precedent. They, capital T, they trademark, because they want this thing to be binding in the future. So whatever Biden is up to or the next guy is up to, these things are important because of the precedent it sets for future behavior. And furthermore, I would say when it's crystal clear that they have these levels of immunity, it will actually influence their future behavior. They will, of course, push this stuff to the absolute limits, even to the point where they will set up criminal activity or wrongful things because they know that how far they can push it. So that's why it's actually important in the long run. It's not really important for the Trump stuff. I don't care about that. And I mean, I actually am wondering if, on the one hand, he gets this stuff gets pushed off and he gets reelected, and then you have that crisis of the constitutional crisis or not my president stuff. You're going to have that on one side, or a lot of times it's both sides. Like they get prepared. Like I wonder if Big T, they make the call of who's going to be the next president very far in advance. I think they do a lot of this polling and debates and stuff because they want to see where your zeitgeist is. They want to see where we will let them take us, or where they would benefit most from exploiting the current mood. So I think they set up both sides as having a potential constitutional issue or legitimacy issue. So you've got the silly Biden's senile thing And are we going to swap him out for somebody else? Like, how does that work? It's going to be unprecedented. And then you're going to have that legitimacy issue. So I feel like the way this affects the Trump cases is really more about that drama at election time. But the precedent about absolute immunity didn't, who was it? Lord Acton say it said power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are very seldom good men, something like that. But it was about giving the Pope, the church ruling that the Pope was infallible in matters of faith and morals, which is very, very rarely invoked. But that's what that absolute power quote was about. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay. All right. Another thing. Here's another headline for you. Far right wins first round of French parliamentary elections. Le Pen's national rally is on track to score an unprecedented haul of seats in July 7th runoff. All right. So I feel like this is just it's meant to set up a divided government similar to the one in Georgia. So we were talking about some recent, I believe I forget what the subject matter was, but it was something in Georgia where the president is like some globalist shill, and the prime minister is more of a person of the people, and it creates problems. And then this seems like it's going to be the same thing. They're setting it up on purpose to have a divided government. So Macron is of one party. He's going to be the president until 2027. And then the prime minister, if this national rally, which is the far right thing, which was established by Marine Le Pen's father. And I mean, I didn't do much research into it, but it was in one of the articles I read that it was her father and another guy who was actually in like the French Nazis. So, like, they're Nazis. They're National Socialists, but that is actually a thing that if you look at some of these platforms, it's like we're nationalists and we're socialists. I mean, these guys aren't free market people; they're socialists. So, anyway. So if those guys they would have, this is one of those parliamentary systems where the prime minister is the head of the party that has the majority in the legislature. Yes. So that's what they're setting up. And this is what really freaking galls me. So anyway, this is the first round. The second round is going to determine the actual people who are in those parliamentary seats. And so it's a three-way race. And Macron actually established a party recently, kind of like Obrador in Mexico. He established a party recently. So that party, I think it's like 20%. And the left parties, if you put them all together, it's like 28%. And this national rally is not getting more than 50% of the votes. However, so I feel like Macron is like a bull moose, whatever. He's like what Teddy Roosevelt did. He's splitting the ticket either way. I don't know. But the left is saying we need to unite. Macron's party and the left parties need to unite, and then we will clearly beat the national rally. Or the third, and I guess the way to do this would be that whoever came in third should just drop out. And then if the national rally is only getting 33% of the vote or whatever, 33% of the vote, which is exactly what Hitler got, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, in one of his early votes. And of course, it's 33%. Oh my gosh, what am I thinking? Anyway, so if they're getting whatever, but if it's a three-way runoff, they might get the plurality, and then they would have the seats. And then if they got a majority of the seats that way, then they would get the prime ministership. But there's a reason that we can't do the left Macron thing, because there's some spoiler in the left. There's a party called France Unbowed, and they're far left, but they're anti-Semitic. Or I'm not sure if they're actually anti-Semitic, or if they're just anti like Israel's bombing of Gaza. I don't know. I don't know a lot about France Unbowed, but I just know that, oops, there's a reason these guys can't get together. But what was most galling about this coverage, because we talked about this before, when Macron called this election, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Why would he call this election right before the Olympics? It's stupid. Just because this national rally got some seats in the European Parliament, which matters a lot less, and there's no reason to take that as a massive disruption to France at this time. And he did it anyway. And of course, my argument is he did it because he wanted to, because he knew that it would be disruptive, because they're trying to get conflict. That is the watchword of the new democratic democracy machine. It used to be to have this welfare warfare center, the liberal fascist center, I used to call it. But now they polarize on really superficial things, but they're both still for welfare and warfare. In the final analysis, that's still what you're going to get. And you're still going to get totalitarian dictatorship. But anyway, so it says, Macron placed a massive bet when he called the snap elections, expecting to edge out leftist parties in the first round and force their voters to rally around his party, which was the third party, is the smallest party, for the runoff as they had in previous national elections. The election, Macron said, would provide France with a moment of clarification after her forces trounced his in European elections at the start of June. Now, this is the big wow. Now Macron's calculation appears to have backfired. Of course, it has not backfired. This was what it was meant to do. Anyway, ushering Le Pen and her allies within striking distance of a 289-seat majority in the National Assembly. That would compel Macron to select a prime minister from Le Pen's ranks, as Paris is just weeks away from hosting the Summer Olympics. And that person would be the 28-year-old Jordan Bardella, which, by the way, that's an English name and an Italian name, which I believe used to be illegal. So I think it's funny, and I've mentioned this before, I think it's funny that he's the guy who is going to be the nationalist savior. Anyway, he is placing immigration, the rising cost of living, which is that COVID inflation for sure, anyway, and also crime. That's their big thing. But it's way too late. It's kind of like seeing kids who have Down syndrome in ads after they've perfected sonograms and raised the termination rate almost to 100%. It's like, then they're just cute little novelties. It's way, way too late for what Le Pen or her father was trying to do decades ago, which is to correct the immigration problem. If France has not enough, they feel like they have too much immigration. It's overwhelmed. It actually has the largest, I believe, one of the largest Muslim minorities in Europe, which people think are encroaching on the secular values of France. But I mean, that ship has absolutely sailed. Anyway, so what are they going to do? Their campaign rested on restricting the rights of foreign residents living legally in France and tightening access to citizenship, welfare, and housing. If you get rid of the welfare, that will probably correct your problem. The party aims to rewrite parts of the French constitution, not just because they want the goodies, but if they're there and they have to work, they have to conform to the culture, because the working culture is how you disseminate that stuff. Here, anyway, I've noticed that here. They want to abolish the right to citizenship for the children of foreigners who are born in France, so no birthright citizenship. Wants to bar women from wearing Muslim headscarves in any public space, including the sidewalks of Paris, although that won't be a priority. It's like one of the questions in the debate was that Jake Tapper asked Trump, what's your immigration policy? What would you do? Would you kick out all the people who are here illegally? And he basically said, that's a lot of people. So, I mean, it's just a lot of people. You're not going to solve your problem this way. You're going to cause conflict. I mean, it is a problem. There are ways to solve it, but I feel like it's a little bit too late. Anyway, but the story that really caught my eye, that I have really been thinking about so much lately, and it's bothering me a lot. This is something that I mean, I may resort to actually taking action, which is very unlike me. I like to, I mean, like I've said before, I hate going to the grocery store. I'm not going to city hall meeting, and I'm not doing what Courtney does, which is fly to Switzerland to speak at a place that, is totally foreign to me. But I am super worried about the tech, the AI energy consumption. And right on the front page of the journal today, I was already thinking about it. It says the tech industry wants to lock up nuclear power for AI. Largest tech companies are looking to buy nuclear power directly from plants, which could sap the grid of critical resources. I wasn't even really thinking of that. I was thinking about it more generally. This was my thought that AI absorbs a ton of energy. It uses an enormous amount of energy. Like I don't have like stats at my fingertips, but my impression was it will use more energy than we use currently in the entire world. Like it reminds me of the whaling thing. People like I used to love reading books about whaling, Moby Dick, and all this stuff. Lots and lots of books about whaling, like 19th century whaling. I don't know why I liked it so much, but I just found it fascinating. And they act like it was so bad, so cruel that we've endangered the whales through all of this. No way, man. The endangerment to the whales was when they modernized whaling in the 20th century and they had high-speed whaleboats, electric harpoons, they had sonar, they could find those whales and kill them all. I mean, that was when whales started to become extinct. And that's the kind of level up, step function or whatever that I think AI is bringing to energy consumption. And any idea that they didn't see this coming, big T they, that the people who are the government subsidies of AI, anybody who was behind the green energy movement from the beginning, I think when AI, was a twinkle in Turing's, eye or whatever, that they knew what it was going to take. And I'm actually surprised that it's only now that nuclear power plants are seeing a rise in share price, or that some of them went offline previously. I'm assuming the ones that went offline were meant to go offline. I mean, it's just, a little surprised that this is just emerging right now. But the idea that they have been telling us that fossil fuels are bad for us, that we need to use wind power and solar power, that we need to get used to induced blackouts, planned blackouts, that we have to reduce our energy consumption and stay home. It's part of the big picture of the same thing. But AI uses so much energy. And I believe, I mean, obviously the broad brushstroke here is that it's about total control. It's about pushing that control up to the top. Hand in hand with that is us staying home and not going to places. So there's like a double whammy with us not using fossil fuels. Well, you can't drive a car because there isn't enough of this, because climate and green and blah blah blah. But that feeds into the fact that we then are connected to AI and we think we need it, we think we want it. But in reality, the amount of energy that is being that will be used for that, it's for nothing but control. It's nothing but the panopticon. That's the thing that freaks me out. When I drive my car to a place of commerce or production or community, there are reasons to physically be there. When I use energy to pick food or grow food or purchase food or clothing, any of that these are physical necessities for our physical bodies, or go to church, which is a communal spiritual necessity, in my opinion. But when you do all those things, those are uses of energy that are consistent with who we are. But AI is not that at all. So you're taking this thing that has we have no need for it whatsoever. Human beings can be actualized and fulfilled as is right now, according to current technologies, according to current population levels, trajectories of population levels, everything. We can have everything we need, which is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health and prosperity, as things are, or even it doesn't even have to be as things are in the physical world as it is. So they're layering this AI, which it's immoral for 2 reasons to use the energy for that, not to mention that it's probably immoral for what their purposes are. It's a waste of resources. Like, to waste energy, that's wrong. That's a sin, to really waste anything, to waste the resources of this earth, and they're talking real resources. I mean, they're going to skim this AI, they're gonna skim the nuclear power off the top and leave us with the less reliable power. It's also gonna drive people into more of the fossil fuels and stuff that they were telling us to get away from. We will be back to that. Uh, but so they're not only, is it are you using those resources, which I was taught. My father was a conservationist, you know? He wasn't an environmentalist, he was a conservationist. He taught us it was wrong to leave the lights on. That's wasteful, and that's wrong. And then not only is it a waste of the resources, but it's a waste of the, it creates actual waste. My son came home from school and turned the TV on. But it's an actual, it creates waste. So, not just like fossil fuel pollution, but nuclear waste, they have to dispose of that. That's a real issue. I mean, I am not opposed to nukes. There was huge no nukes when I was growing up. Like, all the liberals were super no nukes. Where are they now? I would like to know. Like, we had Reagan Democrats, maybe we have Musk liberals. Like, there's like, oh, whatever, it's fine. He says so. But the nuclear waste is a serious issue, and it needs to be addressed. There are fights about where they're going to put it. They encase it in concrete. Like, does that last forever? The idea of like shooting it off into space, like, that's crazy too. I actually feel like this is a closed system. And even if you could shoot stuff off it, you don't want to. Like, that could make a critical like tipping point. So not only do I have all these problems with it, what it's being used for, what it will do to us, wasting resources and creating waste, it, of course, is being subsidized. So what's happening is these companies, first of all, the tech companies are insisting they want zero carbon energy. So they're getting first dibs at the nukes when it just means it's going to push us all into the other stuff. It says the data center that Amazon purchased in Pennsylvania can receive up to 960 megawatts of electricity, enough to power hundreds of thousands of homes. The acquisition accelerated interest in so-called behind-the-meter deals, in which a large customer receives power directly from a plant. The relatively new arrangements mean data centers can be built years faster because little to no new grid infrastructure is needed. Data centers could also avoid transmission and distribution charges that make up a large share of utility bills. So they will be insulated from transmission and distribution charges that the rest of us have to pay. And I believe through probably many different mechanisms, but also overt subsidies, bond deals, tax breaks, many of these, if not all of these utilities, which are highly government connected, have benefited from taxpayer dollars. But the argument is that we're getting the benefit. Not so when it starts getting diverted to AI. This is a big problem. I am super bummed about this. Let's see. All right, I don't know why I had little technical difficulties to start the show. So let me get to the comments. If we can do a couple more stories, we will, and then I'll get to my little thing. Okay. So, good afternoon, Angus. Angus says this rerun of 2020 is just a way to keep the chaos going and finish the destruction of the country. I definitely think it's a rerun and all of that. I totally agree. KM, nobody is getting prosecuted. It's all nonsense to waste your time and energy. It's theater, much nonsense. I totally agree. Steve Bannon, I wasn't even going to mention it. Steve Bannon had to report to prison or whatever. I mean, he was in on the Carter debacle of not getting the hostages out of Iran before the Reagan election. And Bannon was as a young man, as a young, like, Admiralty Department sailor guy, at the inauguration of Reagan, having been on the team of the October surprise for Carter. So, and I was actually thinking when Bannon shows up for, like, in a low security prison for 4 months, I'm thinking, I might like that. I mean, presuming you don't get raped in low security prisons, I think I could probably 3 squares and a cot. I think I might have lose a few pounds, catch up on my reading. I remember a guy who was completely railroaded by the government, Ralph Macchio. Or Joe Naccio, Nacchio. He was the CEO of Quest when the government, media company or a telecom company, when the government wanted warrantless wiretaps, and he refused, and then they railroaded him, and he couldn't mount a defense that's what they were doing. So he went to jail for 4 years, and he got out. He's like, I'm super fit. I read the Wall Street Journal every day, cover to cover. I'm like, really? That's where you know what I mean? You could have cracked the code by then, but it's very hard. But that was a long time ago too, when it was probably much harder to see through. I mean, pre 9/11, it was a little harder to see through it all. Angela says Massey is one of the good ones. My condolences and prayers for him and his family. Absolutely, yes. And I mean, absolutely. The whole selection process has become illegitimate. That is true. So I saw earlier on that who had Renee King says, Monica, even the Pennsylvania milk case YouTube gal had an interview with Mr. Massey. Wow. I saw something okay. Why is Monica presenting this nonsense as real? That's the puzzle. So, KM, are you still here? Yeah, JC says you can still learn from the propaganda they present to us and what they want us to think. I totally agree. So I read the Wall Street Journal not to see what's going on, but to see what they're putting in the Wall Street Journal. Yes, I do listen. She's doing a newscast and then listens to the comments. That is correct. Sometimes I can't read them all, especially today when I'm running late. So KM, if you have another response to this, I'm happy to explain. And okay, I can't find it. There are too many comments today. Yes, KM. I think Macron did. He called the election. It was a parliamentary election. The presidential election is until 2027. And I agree Assange was in fake jail. Okay. So, all right. Well, I hope that I answered your questions. I hope that I made it clear why I talked about the Supreme Court case, because the immunity issue is going to matter. The Trump cases, I don't actually care about. That is true, which is why I don't follow it too much. Anyway, okay. So I cannot read all these comments because there are a lot, which is super fun. Nice way to chat. But I am going to give you one more story, and then I want to do the clips. Okay. U.S. Marshals. This is a story. Did you hear this on HLN, Fox Headline News, or whatever it was I was listening to? U.S. Marshals recover 200 missing children across the U.S. during Operation We Will Find You #2. So this is the second time they've done Operation We Will Find You. U.S. Marshals say 123 of the children were recovered from dangerous situations such as sex trafficking and child exploitation. And it went on to say how this is the second time they've done it. It's from May to June, and they just do the sweep and they rescue all these kids. Now, I had seen that before. They do that every year. And I remember thinking that it was weird because why do they wait till once a year? Like, if you have a lead on a kid, why don't you just get that kid every time? Because the suffering a child who's being abused that could go through in a year is an absolute game changer. And, is it like a puppy mill type situation where all the kids are in one place and you have to raid that one place? It's very fishy. And I am putting in the show notes this article, but also an article I found. I just like Googled, with a time limit to see when this has happened before. I have a 2014 article from the New York Post. FBI sex trafficking bust recovers 168 kids, some never reported missing. They do this once a year. It's very weird. And it reminds me of the Nancy Schaefer story. Nancy Schaefer was a state senator in Georgia. Garland Favorito did a lot of work on this. She was working on a book, I believe, and I think there might have been like a film about it, about Child Protective Services having a terrible, terrible track record of kids who are identified by the system and not taken out, something like this, not taken out of their homes, versus kids who are taken out of their homes. Kids who are taken out of their homes by Child Protective Services were 6 times more likely to die, I think. Something like that. Again, I put the her stuff and stories about her in the show notes. She was found shot in the back, and her husband was found shot in the chest. It was ruled a murder-suicide. Absolutely no reason for it. Some evidence suggests that that isn't really possible. And people think that it was her work on these child services and that she was saying if there's money in it, that some kids are sometimes identified for like real abuse from afar, like like my image of how Dick Cheney got his last heart, just like drove slowly past a college campus and just like, I'll take that one. That's not funny, but I do think that that's how it works. Anyway, so I always think it's crazy. Like, yeah, 123 were maybe rescued from sex trafficking. What about the rest? I just don't know. It was one of the last things I gave up when I became an anarcho-capitalist. I was like, okay, in the end, I thought, well, what about, child services? I can't remember thinking that child services was good for children. Now I'm like, they're probably the worst possible thing for children. I've heard more people abused by that system than benefited from it. Okay. So let us do the debate. So I saw the debate and I didn't watch the whole debate. I just sampled it. It was ridiculous. I caught a few points. And here's my thinking about this. Biden was being called senile and having those episodes were being identified back in before, like during the first campaign. So 4 years ago, or however long ago that was. When did he? Right. So he won in 2020. So 2020, 4 years ago, he was being talked about like he was senile and whatever. And I'm thinking, first of all, this guy was always like that. He was always gaffe prone. And then I thought, he is so corrupt. Like there's so many huge, like billion-dollar skeletons in his closet that I wouldn't be surprised if he's pulling a Vinny the Chin. And actually on the last Union of the Unwanted, Steve Poikonen said that too. I don't know if he made the connection about criminal defense, but just this idea that Vinny the Chin was a mobster who was wanted for murder. And to make it look like he was crazy, he would walk around the neighborhood with his goons in tow, but in slippers and a bathrobe and unshaven. I mean, it couldn't have been actually mentally ill. Like nobody with the goons would you wouldn't let your grandpa or whatever walk around outside like that. You know, he was feeble. You would dress him, you know, so it was clearly a show. And that's what I always thought was going on with Biden. So then when I saw the debate, I was like, he really looks out of it. Like, is there any chance this is for real? And then I remembered a couple of things. One is that Hollywood is DC is Hollywood for ugly people. Like, they are first and foremost actors. And I thought, okay, well, let's just see. Like, they said he was like this 4 years ago when he wasn't. And I just randomly picked like a video. I was like, Joe Biden video before this year. And it came up with one from January 2022, I think. And this was years after they started calling him senile. And, you know, I want to talk about what that might be about. But just as an aside, I don't know if anyone's seen Apple TV. Do you get a subscription to Apple TV? They have like all these shows that I'm totally hooked on. But one thing I noticed is that like so many of the actors are kind of weird looking, like not attractive in a Hollywood sense at all. Not just like DEI stuff, but just weird looking people. And I'm just looking, I'm thinking, what are they trying to change our standards of beauty? And then I realized what I think they're doing. The people just they speak American English, like they're native English speakers from America. They just don't look American. So, like if you go to a foreign country, like where they have ethnicity still, you know, white ethnicities of different countries, like they all, you know, I don't know, English people, like maybe their eyebrows are a little like longer, you know what I mean? Like it's just different. Americans just have a look. And if they start having people with bad teeth, then you'll really know they're trying to make it like the global community. We're supposed to identify with the global citizen, which doesn't look exactly like an American. So I think it could be, you know, that a lot of us are kind of mixed ethnicities. So you don't have, or nationalities. So you don't have like that one specific feature because it's mixed with another gene and it was a double recessive. So you're never getting it in the next generation. I also think there's developmental plasticity, which is Lamarck versus Darwin, where you're like, there's a subcellular intelligence. It's like, oh, these people like bigger eyes. Like, you know, I'm gonna give you the bigger eye, gonna turn on the bigger eye gene for this one. Anyway, we've talked about that before too. So let's check these clips out and see what we got. See what you think.
We worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, it made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. Significantly, by the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we found ourselves in a situation where when he was president,
you can actually see, though, they're still giving him the Botox. So that was a little confusing.
He was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look.
I wonder, so remember, they don't have an audience there. There's no outside organization like there normally is. This is a very controlled environment. It's on CNN, which is definitely deep state. It's, in my opinion, likely highly staged. Trump looks great. He's totally normal, good. I mean, that picture of Biden, I almost wonder if he is that good an actor, but he's been doing this, as he mentions later in the debate. He was the youngest and now he's the oldest. So he's been doing this for 60 years. If I could see him sliding into this role for sure of being the senile old man.
We had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do was leave it. He decided to open up our border, open up our country to people that are from prisons, people that are from mental institutions, insane asylum, terrorists. We have the largest number of terrorists coming into our country right now, all terrorists, all over the world, not just in South America, all over the world. They come from the Middle East, everywhere, all over the world, they're pouring in. And this guy just left it open. And he didn't need legislation because I didn't have legislation. I said, close the border. We had the safest border in history. In that final couple of months of my presidency, we had, according to Border Patrol, who is great, and by the way, who endorsed me for president, but I won't say that, but they endorsed me for president. Brandon, just speak to him. But
Did you catch that? Brandon, just speak to him. Let's go, Brandon. I feel like that was a line that he was supposed to deliver a little better than that. He didn't do great, but that doesn't mean the whole thing was staged. That kind of stuff I think is kind of normal. But Joe looks really not with it.
look, we had the safest border in history. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it. And people are dying all over the place, including the people that are coming up in
Thank you,
caravans.
President Trump.
Okay. So that was 2 years ago. No, sorry, that was just the other day. And this was 2 years ago. And I realized 2 years is a long time. I'm not saying that, but this was 2 years after they started saying this guy was senile. And I feel like, check it out. Tell me what you think. And also check out the person doing sign language's facial expressions. Like, she doesn't actually have to do that because you can see his face. Like, he's doing his own facial expressions. I think it's pretty funny, but of course it's part of the translation thing, I think.
Part of how we're going to build a better America. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So thank you for the introduction, JoJo. Mayor, Mr. Mayor, County Executive Rich Fitzgerald, great to see you again, pal. And it's good to be here with so many outstanding folks, particularly the governor, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman.
This is also funny. Like, every single solitary person, they always pat each other on the back, always love the politicians. This guy, that guy, this guy's great, savior, whatever. Anyway.
John, I had you in front of me when I was playing at Delaware. I could have been an All-American. I could have been big. And Connor Lamb, it's great to see you, man. And you're doing a hell of a job, all of you. My good friend and former neighbor in Scranton, Bobby Casey. Now, his dad, we're about the same spread. His dad was as much older than me than I am than Bobby, but I lived in North Washington Avenue. You notice they changed the end of the road name. It's the Joe Biden way now. No, really, you see that?
Look, he looks like a person. Like, his plastic surgery looks kind of crazy.
I shouldn't say this. I'm going to get in trouble in Delaware, Mr. Secretary. But the first thing I asked out of the election results, I said, how did I do in Scranton? I won every precinct.
I mean, look, that's an animated person.
And so
He seems real.
I used to drive up Route 81 all the time to get not just to get Scranton, but get up to Syracuse when I was at Syracuse Law School. And the entrance to go get to Scranton off 81 is the Joe Biden Expressway. So I'm coming home, Bobby. I'm coming home. But look, all kidding aside, I want to thank our Commerce Secretary, former Governor Gina Raimondo, for joining us today. And I want to thank Congressman Mike Doyle, who couldn't be here today, but who's done so much for this district. Nearly 3 years ago, I began my campaign for president right here in Pittsburgh, first major stop I made. I said back then I was running to restore the backbone of America.
Now he's
the middle
reading.
class. It's time we began to build this country from the middle up and the bottom out.
Well, maybe he's not, because I think he means from the bottom up and the middle out, but close enough.
So that I've never known when a wealthy person didn't do well when the middle class was doing well. We always do better when ordinary, hardworking people have a shot.
All right, I'm out of here.